say welcome to everyone and welcome back to those of you whom for some of you, I'm happy to say this is the third time I'm seeing you, which is fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. And what I'm referring to for those of you who may be here for your first time is that there were two other trainings. One was a 1 hour learning community conversation, and the other was a 2 hour. And yesterday was the 2 hour learning community conversation about change talk is motivational gold. And today, what we're going to be talking about is once we have change talk, whether it's naturally occurring change talk, NOCT, or whether it is indeed evoked change talk, which we have intentionally and selectively drawn that change talk out from the person. This learning community conversation is about the employment or what we do with that change talk once we have it. And I will honestly and purposefully disclose, and I mentioned this yesterday in the learning community conversation that we had, that the reason that I developed this particular learning community conversation was because I've listened to many audio recordings of people practicing motivational interviewing. And there are many instances of when there's naturally occurring change talk and when there's change talk that the worker has actually intentionally and very skillfully evoked, and then they don't do anything with it. They just let the money lie on the table and they go forward. And really, what I wanted this learning community conversation to help emphasize and focus on is really two things. And the slide will back this up in a minute. But the first thing is the centrality, the importance of change talk to the practice of motivational interviewing. And sadly, as I've said several times before, not today, but in other instances, change talk is often kind of a brief mention in most trainings or learning community conversations about the evidence-based practice of motivational interviewing. And oddly enough, it's central to the practice of motivational interviewing. So devoting more time to it, I think, is critical in order to be effective at the use of motivational interviewing. The other is if it gets a mention at all, there's very little emphasis about once you've got it, what do you do with it? How do you spend it? How do you put it to work? And why we are actually putting it to work. And it's not an accident. We are putting that change talk to work because there's a benefit to doing that. It strengthens the person's motivation. It helps to decrease that person's sustained talk around the particular change goal. Okay? So that's just a preface of what we're going to hopefully get into a little deeper today. And just by way of brief introduction, because there may be folks here whom I haven't had the opportunity to be in a learning community conversation with before, I could ask the other folks who have been here in learning community conversations before. Oh, and Harley's back. Hey, Harley, welcome back. Good to see you again. I could invite them to tell you my brief introduction, but I'll just very briefly touch on that I'm very fortunate to be a research project director at the New York State Psychiatric Institute in Manhattan. And if you're ever crossing the George Washington Bridge, going into Manhattan from New Jersey, you can see our building because literally it's the green glass, big, gigantic green glass building on the side of Manhattan Island when you're going across. Josette knows what I'm talking about. Yes, yes. So that's my office, folks. That's where I work. Wave when you go by, but keep one hand on the wheel. So there's that. I'm also very fortunate to be a senior staff trainer and curriculum writer for the Northeast and Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Center. I'm also a social worker by training and have the opportunity to be a member of the international organization MINT, which is the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. And that basically is an international group of people who come together as a community and focus on the training of motivational interviewing and supporting practice, fidelity, and refinement for the practice of motivational interviewing. This coming fall, we're going to be having our annual forum, which is a gathering where we do workshops. We're going to be having that in Christchurch, New Zealand. So yeah, I'm very interested, and I'm hopefully going to be able to go to it this year. So it'll be very interesting to do that. And actually, I'm going to submit an abstract and hopefully be able to lead a workshop. But again, it's a very competitive sort of process. So hopefully, I'll get a chance to do that. But we'll see. So that's just a brief bit about me. And again, as I said, I'm a social worker by training. I began my direct service work in 1991, providing direct services to people living with HIV and AIDS from 1991 to 2003, where I made a transition into workforce development and providing technical assistance. So having said that, again, I want to say welcome and welcome back. And we will just take care of a couple of logistical details, and then we will dive right in to our topic today about change talk, what to do with it once you've actually evoked it. And we're very fortunate to have 40 people in the learning community conversation today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I could also amend this title and say what to do with it when it occurs, because I do want to underline that sometimes just in the course of conversation, the client, the participant, the consumer will offer change talk, and we didn't even evoke it. It just comes out as part of the conversation. And again, if it's there, whether it's naturally occurring, whether we evoked it, we want to employ it. We want to put it to work to help this person to move toward change. We now have 41 people in our learning community. 2 hours is not a whole lot of time. And what I'd like to say is that this is our learning community conversation, meaning that it's meant to be relevant, supportive, and useful for you. So what we focus on, what we choose to talk about as a learning community may not necessarily reflect the official positions or views of our funder, and that's okay, as long as it's relevant and supports what you're doing, because that's why they fund these learning community conversations. As we engage in this conversation together, I'm going to ask all of us to consider and be intentional about the language we use as we engage with each other. Words do have power. We can choose to put people first, and we can actually choose words that are welcoming, inclusive, and respectful to all 43 of us who are in this learning community and who may join us as we go forward. Welcome. It's also on the slide with an exclamation point. If you haven't had a chance to do so, and this is probably the official last time I'll say it, if you haven't had a chance to do so, please make sure you type your full name into the chat. And if you are sharing your computer with anybody, if they're also here to get the 2 hours of credit and a copy of the slides at the end when they get their certificate, please make sure to type their names in as well. And again, I'm going to do my best to leave a little bit of time before we conclude the 2 hours for you to complete the brief evaluation. You may recall, or maybe not, I don't know, but you may or may not recall that when you registered for our learning community conversation today, you actually agreed to be on camera and to have a working microphone. Now, a couple of people have already reached out to me through private messaging and let me know that for whatever reason their cameras are not working or they're not able to use their camera right now. And that's perfectly okay. I want to thank them for reaching out and letting me know that. I'm very glad they're here. If you are able to turn your camera on and you are able to be on camera, please do be on camera. Now, having said that, folks, if for whatever reason you need to step away, don't hesitate to do that. I understand that you may have other things that you need to attend to. But again, if you can, step away briefly. It doesn't mean step away for 45 minutes and then step back. So if you need to step away, just send me a private message, I'll be right back, or I need to step away. Turn your camera off and step away. There are 44 of us in the learning community, and that could, hopefully it won't, but it could translate into a lot of background noise if we were all unmuted. So what I would just ask as a guideline is if you wouldn't mind remaining muted unless you have something you want to add. If you have anything you want to add, information, a reaction, a question, a thought, whatever you want to add, do not hesitate at any moment to unmute, and especially don't hesitate to interrupt me. You're more than welcome to interrupt me. If one of our colleagues has the floor, though, please don't interrupt them. Please wait till they're finished, and you can then add what you'd like to add. We're a learning community. There are 44 of us here right now. We may not all have the same perspective. Certainly, we don't all have the same experience. And that's wonderful. That's what's going to make this a rich opportunity. What I would simply ask, especially if you hear something that you don't believe or that you have a different experience of, or you even have different information, what I would ask is within the frame of our learning community that you give each other the respect to let people make their points. And if you want to add a different point of view or a different value or belief, you're more than welcome to. We don't all have to be on the same page. It's not a requirement for a vital and effective learning community. And the final guideline that I'm going to ask everybody to consider is to please make I statements. I had this experience. I believe this, just like I guess I modeled in some small way in the beginning when I shared with you why I wanted to develop this particular learning community conversation based on what I'd heard in audio recordings. And, I said this yesterday, but it again, based on my experience yesterday, and I know some of you may not have been at the learning community conversation yesterday, but what I will say is I really welcome and appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation in our learning community, because my understanding of change talk and what to do with it afterward always grows the more I get to talk with other colleagues and people who are interested in the topic in the learning community. So again, I want to thank you all for making the time to be here today, and very much looking forward to your thoughts, your reactions about this particular topic. Now I'm going to advance the slide, and this is the goal, but before we look at the goal more deeply, I'm going to quickly check the chat. Okay. Excellent. I see that people are still typing their names in, and people are letting me know about their cameras. Not a problem. Thank you for letting me know. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. I'm just going to ask, can everybody agree to those guidelines as stated? You can wave, nod, throw money, make a deposit in my bank account. Excellent. Very good. Very good. Excellent. Excellent. Very good. Very good. Okay. So those are our guidelines, folks. That is how we will be with each other in this learning community focused on this particular topic. And thank you so much for those of you who are typing the letter Y in the chat. Not asking why, and you certainly could ask why, but confirming that they agree to the guidelines. So I'm going to share my screen briefly again, and we'll look at the goal that hopefully we will achieve in this very short time. And I'm very curious, and you can do it by show of hands, or you can put you can type a Y in the chat. How many people were here at the earlier training that was the 1 hour overview. How many people, and if you can wave, you can put a Y in the chat. I'm just curious. Yeah, okay. So a number of people, okay, good. A number of people were here at that. Well, here we have 2 hours, but again, it's not an overview. We're focusing on a very unique, like we did yesterday, we're focusing on a very unique aspect of the element of change talk in the practice of motivational interviewing, and then the strategies of how to employ it. Okay. And the reason I wanted to emphasize that, folks, this is an evidence-based practice. And the more we get exposed to it, talk about it, think about it, and engage in conversation about it, the more we will have a deeper understanding of all the different pieces, all the moving parts. The other thing, and I'll just say this for those of you who maybe weren't here for either of the other prior learning community conversations, at the near the end of May next month, we are going to do a 6-hour theory and practice of motivational interviewing. It'll be done in 3 2-hour segments. I think the math is right there. So it'll be 6 hours total, and that will be a much deeper look and overview, but a deeper look into the practice of motivational interviewing. Okay, so I just want to let you know that we don't have the exact dates yet. And Catherine is asking, where will we find that info? You can go to our ATTC, the Northeast and Caribbean ATTC website in May, probably at the beginning of May, and it will list the dates and the registration links for those trainings. Okay, and I will throw out, and I'm not exactly sure why, but I will throw out that sometimes that 6-hour overview gets very filled up. So if you're interested in that, and I hope some of you will join us for that, if you're interested in that, please do register as quickly as you can. So just so you know, folks, if you go probably at the beginning of May, because we'll set those dates early on, those registration links will be there and you'll be able to register if it's something that you're interested in or if it would support what you're doing, or if you have other colleagues who might be interested in, please feel free. But again, let them know if they're interested to try and register as early as possible. And my colleague Tree Chapel just put the link in the chat if anybody wants to take a look at that. And then you have it, of course, if you want to refer to it later. So I'm going to share my screen and have us focus just briefly on the goal and learning objectives. As I said earlier, the thing I really want to underline, folks, is that change talk, which several people may recall from the conversation we had yesterday about it, is yes, it is motivational gold, and it is central to and essential to the practice of motivational interviewing. And notice, and this is a distinction that will be very perhaps clear for some people in the learning community, notice that this says that change talk as essential to the practice of motivational interviewing. It does not say that change talk is essential to an MI consistent approach. And that's an important distinction to make. Also, whenever we are practicing motivational interviewing, we want to learn to train our ears in order to recognize it, to hear it. And let me underline, it's when somebody is talking about their desire to make a specific change, their ability to make that specific change, their reasons to make that specific change, or their need to make that specific change. That's all change talk. Sometimes change talk, when the motivation has increased and grown, sometimes the person will offer language that is a commitment to making the change. I'm going to cut down the amount of marijuana that I smoke on a daily basis. is something that the person might say. They might come in and say, these are some of the things that I could do in order to cut down the amount of marijuana I'm smoking on a daily basis. Or they might come in and they might say, since we talked last, or since I saw you last, these are some of the things I did that led me closer or actually helped me cut down. And that is another kind of change talk. But again, noticing and being aware of change talk is critical to the practice of motivational interviewing. And in addition to being aware of it, and that's maybe skill one, skill two is then employing it, putting it to work when it naturally occurs or when we evoke it. And again, the sheer fact that we're aware of it, we want to put it to work. So that's the purpose. The learning objectives are as follows. This idea that of course, everybody wants to we want to be able to define it. I'm confident that there are many people in our learning community today that can give a very articulate and accurate definition of what change talk is. We're all going to leave on the same page with that. State the role of change talk, and I will give you a hint. I like to think of change talk as the gasoline in the tank or the motor that helps increase the person's motivation so they can actually move toward and actually make a change. There are a number of strategies that we can actually use to draw out or evoke change talk. And we're going to touch on those and review them. And then we might get a demonstration, again, time permitting, of the employment of change talk during a conversation about behavior change. Because remember, change talk is associated, connected, linked with a particular behavioral change goal. And then the idea of thinking about how you can use change talk. So those are our learning objectives for this particular learning community conversation. Now, before I just quickly touch on and review the practice of motivational interviewing, I want to invite the learning community. I want to invite anybody who'd like to unmute to respond to one or both of two things. Thing one, based on what you already know, based on what you logged on to this learning community conversation with, what is a comment that you might want to make about, and I'm putting it in quotes, change talk? So that's thing one. What's a comment that you might want to make about change talk? And thing two, you can pick either or both. Thing two, walking into this learning community conversation where you are right now, what's one question that you might have about change talk? So you can unmute and either offer a comment. Mary's really given it some thought, I can tell. Love that, Mary. Love that. A comment that you'd offer about change talk or a question that you have about it. And I'm asking you based on just where you are and what you're bringing to the table right now. And I know that everybody's bringing one or both of those things to the table. So I'm going to stop talking. We're open to comment or question. Katrina, did you want to say? Yeah, go ahead, Katrina. Please go ahead. Katrina's starting us off.
I work with a population of men, males, 17. I run a 17-bed facility. And so I've taken some motivational interviewing, but I was interested in the change talk because sometimes I found when you're having a conversation with them, if you utilize like change talk, I'll say, or like you said before, you kind of guide them into what they should say or what they are thinking in the moment, right?
Yeah.
Some of them, because I guess the rule of thumb is you're kind of the age bracket of when you started using substances.
Yep.
So I find that I have a lot with a lack of motivation until they're pushed. So how do you start that? I guess my question is like in the beginning to get them thinking, to get them motivated, to get them more so learning how to utilize it as well. You know, you as an educator or as a counselor or whatever, program director, you try to get them thinking in a certain way to help them. But I
Yeah.
have like one person particular that's been here 3 years, and it's like gotten down to the wire that he has to move. But I've been having the conversation for a year. So how do you get the client to get it? You know what I mean?
I do. I think I do. And I love your question. And it's interesting because within your question is also comment as well. And I understand the overlap between the two. The thing that there's one word that really jumped to my mind as I was hearing what you were saying, Katrina. And that was the distinction between an am I consistent approach and the practice of motivational interviewing. Because what you described to me, if as I hear it, and again, you need to um, advise me if I'm not understanding you clearly. What I'm hearing from you is more of an emphasis on an am I consistent approach to see if there's any behavioral change goal that's going to come to the forefront that we could then possibly practice motivational interviewing with. Because there may be an external behavioral change goal that maybe we have, or the program has, or the organization has, but it's not their behavioral change goal. Am I getting that right, Katrina?
Yes, yes, you hit the nail on the head.
Okay. So that's why there would be little to no motivation because it's not theirs. And I think this is where an am I consistent approach, and that's not really going to be the focus of our conversation today, but I will just repeat, Katrina, that am I consistent approach is about building engagement and rapport for the possibility of developing trust. And the way we do that is through partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. And that spells PACE: partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. And that's the basis, the foundation of an am I consistent approach. And the emphasis in terms of, Katrina, what I'm hearing from you, the emphasis of the conversation is a focus on that. And then through that conversation, it's possible that a client-centered behavioral change goal might come to the forefront that we could potentially practice motivational interviewing to identify and strengthen motivation for that behavioral change goal. Katrina, do you have any thought or any reaction to what I just said?
No, I get it. I think you're spot on. It makes it make sense, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because with some of them, it's like you just want to go, why aren't you getting what I'm saying? Like, and I have a couple, but I have one that, like I said, they've been
Yep.
here. It's supposed to be a 6 to 9 month program.
Right. And they've been there a year.
3. So it's like I'm constantly having conversations, and like you just said, I've tweaked it, I've said it different ways, I've tried to, and now it's like it's direct, like you have to do ABCD. So and I feel like I'm almost like the mother hen pushing my children, but I just feel like, am I doing enough? Am I utilizing the right approach? Am I saying it the right way? Am I doing my due diligence to help them as best as I can? You know what I mean?
I do. I
So
do.
what you said made dead sense, and it gives some clarity to me, you know.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And you know, something that you said really strikes me as there's many things that you said that strike me as powerful, but there's one thing that's really jumping out to me that I really want to underline for everybody, because I think it speaks to sometimes, and I'm going to use this word, it speaks to the trap that we sometimes can fall into because we care, because we want this person to succeed, because we want them to quote unquote get it so that they can go forward and they can have a happy, fulfilling, hopefully maybe substance-free life. Okay? And we want all that for our participants, our consumers, for our patients, our clients. And Katrina, something you said is so insightful. I really, really want to underline it. And I'm hopefully capturing exactly what you said, which is you said, you know, sometimes I ask myself, why aren't they getting what I'm saying? And that's really important to understand, folks, because MI only works with what they say, not what we say. And that's why we employ their change talk, not our change talk. So what we can really and I love that you said it that way, Katrina, because you're not, I believe I may be making a generalization here, and please forgive me because I know we said we were only going to make I statements. But the hopefully gentle generalization is that we might be under the mindset of that if only they would just get what I'm saying. And what you're saying is not motivating. It's what they say. It's their language. And I'll give a concrete example. There's a video that I mentioned early on, and this is a video everybody can have access to. It's on YouTube, so anybody who has internet access can access this video. And there are two videos. One of them is called The Ineffective Dentist, and the other one is called The Effective Dentist. And to Katrina's point, the dentist is essentially saying in the first video, The Ineffective Dentist, the dentist is essentially saying, hey, why aren't you getting what I'm telling you? You need to quit. And the woman's response is, I don't even believe what you're telling me is true. And I think that it's my choice and I'm going to do what I want to do. So there's lots of pushback and lots of resistance. And MI, the practice of MI, again, in the presence of an identified behavioral change goal, and even when we're using an MI consistent approach, instead of focusing on why aren't they getting what I'm saying, we can take a different stance and position. How can I more deeply understand what they're saying? And that's where an MI consistent approach can be really helpful. And the second video is where the dentist is really trying to understand how tobacco fits into this woman's life. She's not judging it. She's not telling her she needs to quit. And the beauty of it is in the first video, the dentist says, you need to quit. In the second video, where the dentist is using an MI consistent approach and is practicing motivational interviewing, the patient says to the dentist, I really want to quit. And that's the difference between somebody taking an action or not taking an action, when they actually own it themselves. So we are very fortunate that Katrina is in this learning community today and that you shared what you said, and you said it the way you did. Like, I asked myself, what if they could just get what I'm saying? It's what they say is what's going to motivate them, not what we say. And that's pretty straightforward. right? So Mary writes in the chat, I want to just make sure that I don't lose what people are writing in the chat. Mary writes in the chat, this has been a fascinating opportunity to learn about MI and Change Talk. I work with cancer survivors in an outpatient treatment center. I think this new practice will be beautiful as I work with patients who are ambivalent about making change. Specifically, I frequently work with those receiving with an advanced stage disease who desire feeling normal and continue work, but are tired and are constantly considering disability. Yeah. So, and I mean, talk about a change, a huge change. And Deborah writes, I'm at work. Okay, not a problem. And understood, Stacy. Good. And anything else in the chat? I'm just checking. Okay. So, oh yeah, there something else just popped in. Hold on just 1 second. Harley writes, it's really about taking what they are expressing to you, such as the change talk, and strengthen it and magnifying that, right? Yes, that is correct. You are absolutely right, Harley. Not giving them goals and objectives of what they think of what we think they should be doing. Absolutely. Yep. That's everybody, please read. I kind of mangled it as I read it, but please read what Harley wrote in the chat, because Harley, that's it. That's it. So let me just entertain for just another moment or two. Let me entertain. Are there any other comments specifically about Change Talk that you want to put on the table, or any other questions that you have? And Katrina started us off beautifully because it was a combination of question and comment and insight all kind of rolled into a very valuable gift to the learning community. So any other comments about Change Talk or questions that you want to put on the table? Yeah, go ahead, Anis. Floor is yours.
My question is more along the veins of kind of meeting the clients where they are and going at their pace. I know that sometimes as clinicians, we have a goal or a quota when we go into these sessions, but I'm asking, is it still good practice for motivational interviewing and trying to evoke change talk if we allow them kind of like sort of hold their hand and walk them to the point where we want them to get? Because I've had sessions where they're just not ready. They're not ready. They don't have their why yet. And so it's taken 2, 3, 4 sessions to get them to be like, you know what, maybe I do have a problem. Is that good practice, or is that okay? Or is there a way to kind of still support them on the journey to getting to change talk?
Absolutely. And really that way, and I want to link it to what Katrina said, that way is the MI consistent approach. And an MI consistent approach, folks, is about being with the person where they're at, being a collaborative partner. That's what the P in PACE stands for. It stands for partnership. Absolutely. So being that collaborative partner. Also accepting that that's where the person is at, and valuing, hey, this is where you're at. You have value as a human being right where you are right now. And I accept that. And the compassion part of it. You know what? I may be feeling some pressure as per, my own agenda as the worker, my program's agenda, or the organization's agenda, but I'm going to offer you compassion because your welfare comes before what I want. And the empowerment is letting the person exercise their ability to say yes or no, or what they want to focus on. And that, again, is all preliminary as well as part of the practice of motivational interviewing. And remember, folks, and this is a good opportunity in just a moment to underline again what makes up the practice of motivational interviewing. Because I'll say it again, and I love it. I wish I got $1 every time I said this, but I'm going to say it again. An MI consistent approach, PACE, partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment, is appropriate for any and every conversation that you have. And think about what Harley wrote in the chat. because you really identified it, Harley. That approach is appropriate for any and every conversation that you have. The practice of motivational interviewing is not. And to Anis's point, people aren't always at the place where they have that desire, their ability, their reasons or need. And I love the way you put it, I'm talking with them and they just don't have their why yet. They don't have their why they want to do this. That's where an MI consistent approach is wonderful, because we build partnership and collaboration with them. We engage in conversation. We seek to understand them, not why they're not getting what I'm telling them. We seek to understand them. And then maybe their why in maybe that third or fourth session might be present. Okay, let's take one more comment or question about change talk. Not a problem, Sheila. Understood. Thank you for letting me know. Any one more person want to put a comment about change talk on the table? Or question? Going once? I'm an auctioneer now. Going twice? What do you think, Josette? What would you say about change talk? Or what would be your question about it?
No, I'll just follow along with Harley, what she said. I like totally agree with her by not giving them that goal objective, but just what they're thinking about and what they want to do, and guide them into that thought process.
Absolutely. And that really is, Josette, that's the essence of that MI consistent approach, that partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment.
Right.
Yep. And I'll underline, based on what Josette just offered, again, the thing to keep in mind is if you use that MI consistent approach, if a behavioral change goal, and we can also test it out. I might say, Josette might be telling me something. If I'm the worker and Josette is the patient, Josette might be telling me something. And I might say, a couple of times, Josette, you've mentioned how alcohol has kind of played out in this situation. I'm wondering, tell me a little bit about how alcohol fits into your life right now. And that's kind of testing the waters. I'm not imposing anything. I'm asking the client to kind of give me, and Josette might say, alcohol? No, I didn't realize I said anything about alcohol. It's not a problem at all. Or client might say, oh, I hadn't quite thought of it that way. Yeah, alcohol does kind of this, and this. And what that's called, folks, and again, we're not going to focus on that here because we're focusing on what to do with change talk. And remember, change talk is about a specific behavioral change goal. It's not general, it's specific. And we want to learn to hear it and then employ it. Okay? So if the client was to offer change talk, then we'd want to employ it. All right. Josette, thank you very much. You provided an excellent opportunity to transition into the next piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm just going to state, and I've alluded to it a couple of times already, but I'm just going to state what makes up the practice of motivational interviewing. Because remember, folks, there's a difference between an MI consistent approach and the practice of motivational interviewing. They're related, but they're not the same thing. And we're focusing on change talk, and change talk is linked to the practice of motivational interviewing. first and foremost, and I'm thinking of Josette as I say this, I'm thinking of Harley as I say this, because you did emphasize this idea of client-centeredness, being with the person, meeting the person where they are. The opportunity to practice motivational interviewing occurs when there is an identified behavioral change goal that the person feels ambivalent about. Part of them wants to make the change, another part of them wants to stay the same. An example that I shared yesterday and maybe shared also in the 1 hour brief overview is about a young gentleman who is considering cutting down the amount of weed that he smokes on a daily basis. That's his identified behavior change goal. That's the thing he's considering. We would engage in a conversation with that person, positioning ourselves as a collaborative partner, and we would focus the conversation on that behavioral change goal. And we know that it's a behavioral change goal that the person feels ambivalent about. And then we're going to be doing two very specific things during that conversation. But I do need to underline something, which I underlined yesterday. And that is this. If we're engaging in a conversation with somebody and they identify a behavioral change goal and they are not ambivalent about it, they're like, I'm ready to do this. I'm going to do this. Move to collaboratively developing a plan of action. Do not practice motivational interviewing. It's not needed because the person's not ambivalent. The practice of MI is when the person is ambivalent. A part of them wants to make the change, another part of them doesn't want to make the change. Okay? So if they're not ambivalent, help them plan. Do it in a client-centered way. Help them plan. If they are ambivalent, ka-ching, it's an opportunity to practice motivational interviewing. And that's when the change talk becomes critical to the conversation. Okay? Just keeping that in mind. I felt I needed to underline that again. I'm going to share my screen again. We have positioned ourselves as this collaborative partner. We are engaging in a conversation. We are not interviewing the person. We are engaging in a conversation. You know, Bill Miller, one of the creators of MI, has often said if he could go back and change one thing, he'd change it to motivational conversation, not interviewing, because interviewing overemphasizes the power of the worker and it overemphasizes the use of questions. And questions are only one of several tools we have in order while we engage and practice motivational interviewing. So we're a collaborative partner. We're engaged in a conversation. There's an identified behavioral change goal that the person feels ambivalent about. Part of them wants to make the change, another part of them doesn't. We then guide that conversation intentionally and selectively so that the person can explore, they can verbalize their ambivalence about it. And they then can also identify their motivations, their desire, their ability, their reasons, or their need to make this particular change. And then when they do that, when they make those verbalizations, that's them offering change talk. And then we want to put that change talk to work. So again, just keeping that in mind, folks, the thing I really want to underline, what is this a picture of? And you can type it in the chat. And if you're unsure, you can read the heading on the slide. What is this a picture of? And it's not a trick. Yes, it is a key. And I really want you to associate this visual image with change talk, because change talk is gold. It is 2 solid bars of gold. It is gold, gold, gold. And it is the key to the success of the practice of motivational interviewing. And for many of you who've been in other learning community conversations or trainings about motivational interviewing, I wonder, and I'm guessing, I could be absolutely wrong, but I'm wondering and I'm kind of guessing that in other trainings, change talk has not been as emphasized as I'm emphasizing it here. I could be wrong about that. You may have gone to several trainings where the trainers focused a lot of time on change talk. I have found in my own experience, I have found in my own experience, it's mentioned, very rarely ever touched on in any meaningful or deep way. And ultimately, folks, it is the key to success with the practice of motivational interviewing. And don't misunderstand this. That's not coming from Paul Warren. That's coming from the research, scientific research about motivational interviewing. Keeping it really simple, folks. The more change talk that the person offers, and there are studies that have quantified this, the more change talk that the person offers, whether it's naturally occurring or whether it's been evoked, the more change talk that the person offers, the more likely they are to then move toward offering commitment language. I'm going to do this. These are my thoughts about how I'm going to do it. This is what I've done since I saw you last. The research proves that, folks. The greater the quantity of the change talk coming from the person, not from us, the greater the quantity of the change talk, the more likely the person is to make a commitment. Mary, do you have any thought or comment about that? I see a very interesting reaction on your face, and I just want to invite you if there's anything.
No, I'm just really embracing everything that you're saying, and it's such a so it's interesting because I've been practicing social work for 30 years, but I've always been in medical social work, and I never had any interest in pursuing my clinical license. So I'm doing that now, and so this is all very new information for me, and so I'm just sort of soaking it in like a sponge.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I want to underline something, Mary, because again, I'm excited for you that you're pursuing your clinical degree, because I'm sure it'll be fascinating. It'll be fascinating to sort of look at what you've been doing kind of through those lenses as well. And I also want to reiterate and underline, folks, to practice motivational interviewing, you don't need to be a clinician. Mary doesn't need her clinical degree in order to practice motivational interviewing. And what I will throw out, and I think I said this before in a prior training, I'm a social worker, I'm a clinician, and that made it harder for me to learn how to practice motivational interviewing because it's very different. But the beauty of it is it's playing the piano. And practicing motivational interviewing is playing the violin. Some musicians can play multiple instruments. You're going to be able to play multiple instruments. And anybody who's willing to engage in a learning community about the practice of motivational interviewing, anybody who's willing to actually practice it and reflect on their practice, and then also receive informed feedback about their practice, can learn how to practice motivational interviewing and refine what they're doing. So I really appreciate that Mary shared that, because I do want to underline that that's wonderful. That's really exciting news that she's pursuing her clinical focus, and it is not necessary in order to become proficient and skilled and effective at the practice of motivational interviewing. Excellent. I'm going to share my screen again. And Mary, thank you so much for sharing that. Again, I want you to take in this very big key, these solid gold bars, and associate them, link them in your mind with change talk. Now, remember, folks, change talk is one side of the language of ambivalence that the person may be verbalizing. It's anything that that person says that favors movement in the direction of that change as it relates to a particular and specific behavioral change target. Now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen again just to remind you the language of ambivalence, when someone is actually ambivalent about something. This side of my hand with the ring is the change talk side. The other side without the ring is what's called the sustain talk side. Both sides are normal and both sides are present. This side, the change talk side, will strengthen this person's motivation, sometimes to the point that they are ready to plan and take action. This side, the sustain talk side, will keep the person doing what they're currently doing. This side will keep that young gentleman that I mentioned who's considering cutting down the amount of weed that he smokes on a daily basis. The sustain talk side will keep this young gentleman smoking weed on a daily basis. So if I was to say to him, tell me a little bit about why you smoke weed on a daily basis, I am inviting him to offer more sustain talk. If I say to him, so what are some of the other things that are potentially challenges or problems that might be coming from smoking weed on a daily basis? I am using an open-ended question to draw out more change talk. If I invite this language, the sustain talk language, the person's going to stay exactly where they are. If I invite this language, the change talk language, their motivation is going to grow and expand. Okay? It's technical, folks. I've mentioned in earlier conversations, not this one today, but I'll mention it again today, that MI is verifiable and it's codable. So if Harley is doing an audio recording and we all listen to Harley's audio recording together, we can use a validated instrument, and there are several, but the validated instrument is called the MITI, the MITI. We can all use that instrument and we could hear what Harley was doing in that conversation. That instrument is looking at two relational global measures and two technical measures. The technical measures, hang on to your seats, you're not going to be surprised by this. The two technical measures that it's looking at is, did Harley evoke change talk on a scale of 1 to 5? How effectively did Harley evoke change talk? Second technical measure, did Harley soften sustain talk? Sustain talk and change talk are both normal, folks. They're going to be there. They're part of the language of ambivalence. We emphasize, evoke, and employ the change talk to build motivation. It's technical. It's technical. Okay? It's a technical skill, a technical practice. I'm going to share my screen again. Again, I will underline, if anybody has reactions, comments, or questions, do not hesitate to unmute and throw something out there. Okay? I don't want to get ahead of if you have a comment or question or additional information that you want to add. Please feel free to just unmute and offer it. I love being interrupted. I'm going to share my screen again. So you'll see here this quote, S blank, I blank happens, and so does change talk. Can anybody use the chat to type out the full phrase there in the chat? We're all adults. It's okay if you want to actually type that in the chat. But yes, let's see. Yes. Thank you for putting shit in the chat. Excellent. Yes, that is what it is. I want to acknowledge, folks, that hopefully in a fun way, I want to acknowledge that change talk will naturally occur. If we're using an MI consistent approach and the person feels they're starting to trust us, chances are they're going to talk about their ambivalence. They're going to talk about both sides. So naturally occurring change talk will happen. The point I really want to underline here is you do not have to wait for it to happen. And don't wait for it to happen. Evoke the change talk. And I want to stop sharing my screen to underline that. You can intentionally evoke it. You can use strategies to draw it out. You don't have to just sit around and wait for it to happen. Okay? So just keep that in mind. There are a number of strategies that can be used to evoke change talk. I'm going to share my screen again. And I guess I would say, before I share my screen again, I guess I would say this. Oftentimes I make the phrase in learning community conversations of like, if there's one thing you walk away with from our time together today, and I haven't said that yet until now. And if there is only one thing you walk away with, and I hope there'll be more than one, but if there's only one thing you walk away with from today about this conversation, is that you do not have to wait for change talk to occur. You can evoke it. If there's an identified behavioral change goal that the person feels ambivalent about, you can intentionally and strategically evoke change talk. If there's one thing you walk away with from today, that's the thing I'd like you to walk away with. You don't have to wait for it. You can evoke it. Okay? So hopefully I've underlined that well enough for you to be able to. Thurston writes, change talk is only effective if the person understands what to change related to moving through the stages. Thurston, I'm not exactly sure I understand your comment. So I don't know if you can unmute, and if you can, I want to invite you to do that. And if you could elaborate, that would be great. And if you can't, if you can type more into the chat to elaborate, that would be wonderful. And Jennifer writes, is it possible to go backwards then forward from the stages? And Jennifer, again, can you say a little bit, because both you and Thurston are referring to the trans-theoretical model of change, the stages of change model. So can either of you unmute and elaborate a little bit more about your comment? And I'm pausing for you to, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Jennifer, please.
I was wondering, I know we're focusing on change talk specifically, but we're just wondering if you can go from motivational interviewing and then collaborative, and let's say, for example, he wants to stop smoking on a daily basis. And then when you see the client again next week and says, well, I did end up smoking every day of the week. And is it possible to go back to motivational interviewing after the collaborative? Or it's not, he doesn't succeed in that.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, folks, although it may appear this, Jennifer, excellent question. Although it may appear this way, the practice of motivational interviewing is not linear. So it's possible that somebody could engage in a conversation, identify a behavioral change goal that they feel ambivalent about, maybe set a goal, maybe not set a goal, because we don't always, every conversation doesn't end, quote unquote, with a plan. And it's possible that person, and it's interesting, Jennifer, you provide an interesting opportunity to engage in a little demonstration. So if Jennifer comes in and she says to me, she's the client, and she says, well, Paul, I wanted to let you know that although we talked about me not smoking every day of the week, I did smoke every day of the week. So, yeah, and Jennifer, that's kind of what you're alluding to, right? The client comes in and says that. And my response to that might be, yeah, change is a process, and cutting down the amount you smoke is something that's still on your radar screen. It's still important to you. So the sheer fact that the client is there and they're talking about it is a sign of their motivation. So, Jennifer, that's sometimes referred to, and there actually is a phrase. It's sometimes referred to as snatching change talk from the jaws of ambivalence. I'll say that again slowly. Snatching change talk from the jaws of ambivalence. And I want to also connect it to what you, Jennifer, and what Thurston alluded to. And Thurston, I'm not sure if you're able to unmute or not, but I also want to connect it to the stages of change, the trans theoretical model, which, by the way, is not motivational interviewing. It's a wonderful model to understand the process of change. And MI is a method of communication about change that emphasizes the importance of change talk. They're two separate things. There is a relationship, though. And to Jennifer's point, somebody can move from pre-contemplation to contemplation and then possibly to preparation. They're not moved to action yet, but from pre-contemplation to contemplation to preparation. And depending on where they are in preparation, they may or may not have taken any action. And that's okay. It's perfectly okay. It's part of the change process. Change is not linear at all. And we need to have the flexibility to be able to be with them where they are when we're having that conversation with them. And sometimes we do snatch change talk from the jaws of ambivalence. Yeah. And Thurston, again, if you're able to unmute or if you've elaborated, that would be great. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for adding that to the pile, so to speak. Yes. Wonderful. So again, I just want to pause a moment. Thurston, if you want to unmute, now is a great time. Or if you'd be willing to elaborate in the chat, that would be great too. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again, and if Thurston unmutes, I'll take the slide down again. So this slide is I like to think of this one slide as a little bit of a toolkit. Because what I've done here, which is not new or revolutionary at all to any MI training, but what I've done here is I have put together, I've listed a couple of strategies that we can use. Oh, okay, so Thurston's having trouble with unmuting. Okay, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, Thurston, that will get worked out, that hopefully we'll be able to hear your voice. Or you also can elaborate in the chat, but that may mean more typing. What I've tried to put together for folks here is this idea that there are particular strategies that we can use to help people verbalize change talk. And I want to just review these with you. And what I can tell you, and this is very relevant to the practice of motivational interviewing, you're going to see them on this slide, and they may be strategies that you already use. And what I want to tell you for your consideration is that it's easy to talk about strategies, it's easy to list them, it's easy to describe them, and it's a very different thing to actually practice them and then focus on your practice of them. So the point I want to underline there is that you're going to see some strategies here, and what I want to invite you to consider is practice them with your colleagues, practice them with your clients, your patients. Again, if you're actually evoking change talk about a specific behavioral change goal, and then reflect on what you've done and how you might do it differently or refine what you're doing in order to be more effective. Thurston writes, however, change talk is talk, but what happens after the talk is core to the change. That is very, Thurston, I understand your point much more clearly now. That is very true. And again, we meet that person where they are at the moment that they're engaging in the conversation with us. And Thurston, you didn't say this in the chat, but I wonder if this could be part of what you're saying, and then I'm going to read what other people have put in the chat. So I'm going to take the slide down for a minute. Sometimes I statement here, sometimes I've been in conversations with people when they've said, oh yes, Paul, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And yes, I really want to make this change. They've said that to me. They've offered me change talk about their specific change goal. And I've employed their change talk. And I'm going to underline how we do that going forward. And then they come in the next time, and Jennifer, I'm thinking of you as I say this, they come in the next time and they say, well, I didn't do anything. I didn't make that change. I didn't do it. And I think that could be, and Thurston, please confirm in the chat, if that's really kind of what you're alluding to. When a patient may say to us what they think we want to hear, as opposed to actually offering change to, yeah, Thurston says exactly. Yeah. And that's where I would say to you folks, and Thurston, thank you so much for using the chat to really elaborate on your statement. That is where the partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment really comes in. Because if we are really communicating to a person that we want to understand it from their perspective, if we are really communicating to that person that we are a collaborative partner with them, and perhaps largest among all these elements that I mentioned already, I'm going to mention the biggest one, possibly. If we really communicate to a person that we respect their autonomy, chances are they're not going to try and tell us what we want to hear. They're going to authentically engage in conversation with us. Oftentimes, they will try to tell us what we want to hear when we are trying to educate them, when we are trying to convince them, or when we are trying to tell them what to do. But if we step away from that and we focus on partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment, it's more likely, I can't say I can guarantee it, but it's much more likely that they are going to engage in an authentic conversation with us. So, to Thurston's excellent observation and excellent sort of point, the thing I'd like you all to consider, if you find yourself in situations where clients are telling you exactly what you want to hear, but they're not putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak, they're not following through, or they're not taking the actions, in a very curious and gentle way, ask yourself, was I trying to convince that person? Was I trying to educate that person? Or did I tell that person what they should be doing? And again, just from a very curious perspective, because sometimes we can evoke what I would refer to as the yes, Jennifer syndrome. Yes, Jennifer, I'm going to do that. Yes, Jennifer, that was an excellent suggestion. Yes, Jennifer, I'm going to take every action that you just told me to take, because that's the quickest way to get Jennifer to stop telling me what to do. Right? So people are very adaptive. So I just throw that out there as a point of consideration. And Thurston, I can't thank you enough for putting that on the table. And Thurston writes, I accept that they are not ready yet. The goal of treatment is to develop an attachment to working on their health. The level of work is up to the person. Absolutely, 100%. However, treatment needs to be employed to facilitate change. Yes, and I would say, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and make a statement here, that there are some people that do achieve their health and life goals, or at least incrementally move toward their health and life goals, and they may not be in alignment with 100% abstinence or the parameters of a treatment program. And the reality is also, folks, that some treatment programs are not suited for where some people are. And, you know, it kind of raises a kind of a fascinating question. And I'm going to use this word, and it's not a word I am fond of, but I'll use it. Is the failure the client or the patient, or is the failure the treatment program? Because clearly something may not be working there. So, you know, I think, again, it's important to keep in mind that no two people's recovery is the same. No two people's treatment is the same. And our goal when we practice motivational interviewing is to try and understand it from their perspective and work with them. And again, some people aren't suited for some programs. We know that. People sadly get cut or discharged from programs all the time, or they vote with their own feet. They just don't come back because it's not right for them. So let me just make sure. Okay. So Elisa writes, how does a peer support motivate someone for change in their recovery in a nonprofit agency, which is goal and time limited environment? True, and there can be a conflict there. I find using MI mainly involves engaging what other person is wanting in their recovery. They are already in recovery and have a support system, is more often than not to obtain resources, mainly housing. And again, obtaining resources is not making a behavior change. It's a different sort of thing. Once obtained, they no longer want PS service. Participant already has their own plan agenda, and I support them where they are at. Ask open-ended questions when I hear any pre-contemplation and other previous of their previous share or their plan. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll put it to you this way. And Elisa, thank you for writing that in the chat. I'll put it to you this way, folks, and think about this for yourself. Folks are often far more likely to carry out their plan than the plan we tell them they should carry out. And think about that for yourself. Are you more likely to follow through on your own ideas about how to go forward? And it doesn't mean like if Stacy has a suggestion to make or information to share, it doesn't mean that Stacy can't do that in an am I consistent way. It just means that Stacy would be supporting my autonomy to either follow through on that suggestion or use that information or not. And to Thurston's earlier point, that's entirely up to me. That's on me. So, and you know, if we had another hour, which unfortunately today we do not, I really should put this together because I mention this strategy a lot, which is the strategy of ask, offer, ask, which is this strategy of how, if you have information, if you have suggestions, if you have valuable lived experience that you want to share, there is a way that you can do that that still is, am I consistent and respects that person's autonomy. And it would be worth an hour or a good 2 hours to devote just to that strategy. So I may follow through on that. Thurston writes in the chat, how does the concept of recommendations by professionals fit into MI? Thurston, I just answered your question. I often make recommendations, suggest an insight to evoke change talk. Yeah, and it's interesting. Let me be clear about something. Offering a suggestion, making a recommendation in an MI consistent way is not necessarily evoking change talk. What it is, it's allowing the person to exercise their autonomy. Now, it could potentially evoke change talk. And I'm thinking, Mary, I'm looking at you at the moment. It could be something if you know, Mary was the worker and I was the client, and Mary said to me, hey, Paul, you know, I have some information about what some people who want to cut down the amount of marijuana they're smoking. I have some information about what some folks do. Would it be okay if I shared that with you? And I say to Mary, because she's treating me like a collaborative partner, she's been respecting my autonomy, she's really trying to understand it from my perspective. I say, sure, Mary, share that with me. Mary shares it with me and then says, so what do you make of that? What do you think about that, Paul? And I say to Mary, oh, I've tried that. That would never work for me. That's no good. And as you said it, though, it really made me think maybe I could do this. Now, that could be how Mary's suggestion or information could inspire additional change talk, even if I totally make a decision that I don't want to follow Mary's recommendation or advice, but it might prompt my thinking. And I will also link that, folks, to how effectively Mary will have used an MI consistent approach, partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment, because I'm in a conversation with Mary. I feel free to say, you know, I actually tried that, Mary. It didn't work for me. It did make me think of this, though, which might work for me. Sometimes that happens. Let's see what Anish just wrote in the chat. How would one engage with the goal to evoke change talk with a client teen who has reached microdosing, who has researched microdosing, the benefits, and chose mushrooms to basically self-medicate? I am at a loss because his arguments are supported by research, and science within the treatment space. And he's underage and using while in school. Yeah. Wow. If we had 2 hours, we could maybe unpack the richness in that example. But what I will say is this, and And Anise, there was a word. I don't know if anybody has ever played poker or observed poker or ever seen poker played in a movie, but there is this thing called a tell. And a tell is when somebody kind of tips their hand, so to speak, and you get a sense of where they're coming from. If a patient, a client, a student, a young person is in the position of where they feel they have to make arguments to justify, that might lead me to think we might be trying to convince them of something. And if you don't give the opportunity, if you don't cause a person to feel like they have to defend their position, there's no need for them to whip out their science or their research to say, well, actually, the research says, or it's legal in my state situation. So again, it could be an opportunity to think about what's the emphasis on the conversation. Are we trying to get somebody to do something? And let me be very clear, folks. Using change talk, the practice of motivational interviewing, employing change talk is not about trying to get people to do anything. It's about trying to help people to move toward the change that they've identified. Which may not be the one that your program has identified. It may not be the one that you, as the worker, have identified. And what I can tell you is if you meet that person where they're at, you at least may have the opportunity where they might consider the change that your program wants them to make, or that you think might be better for them. If you don't meet them where they are, they'll engage in telling you what you want to hear, or they won't come back. And that's a missed opportunity. So clearly, simply, directly stated, thing 2 to walk away with. Thing 1 is you don't have to wait for change talk, you can evoke it. Thing 2, employing change talk is not trying to get somebody to do what you want them to do, nor is the practice of motivational interviewing. Just so we're all on the same page about that. All right. Excellent. I am going to share my screen again. And I just want to walk us through as we start to bring what seems to me, and I can only speak for myself, I'm making an I statement here. This seems to have gone very fast to me. That may not be your experience, but it's definitely my experience. And I just want to share these strategies with you. One of them is to ask open-ended questions. Open-ended questions can actually be a strategy to evoke change talk. Another one is a specific type of open-ended question with, and let me give a concrete example here, with the example that I threw out on the table, which is the young gentleman who's considering cutting down the amount of marijuana that he is smoking. A looking forward question might be something like, well, tell me a little bit about what your life will be like if you choose to make this change, to cut down the amount of marijuana that you're smoking. What will your life be like? Or looking back, what was your life like when you were smoking marijuana more than you're smoking it now? So looking forward, looking back is just, it's a specific type of open-ended question that, or 2 open-ended questions that help the person to focus. And remember, these strategies are evoking change talk about the specific behavioral change goal. There are more than just these 2. Another one is querying extremes. What would be the best case scenario of cutting down the amount of marijuana that you're smoking on a daily basis. What would be the worst thing if you chose to keep smoking at the level you're smoking at? Querying extremes, exploring their goals and values. I'll give a concrete example. Let's say the young gentleman, one of the reasons he's considering cutting down the amount of marijuana that he's smoking on a daily basis is because he said that his girlfriend reports to him that when he's stoned, he treats her disrespectfully. He may, in an earlier part of the conversation, have noted that treating people well is important to him. So knowing what somebody's goals and values are can help us to draw contrasts to what their behavior is doing. I'll give a concrete example here. And I believe the example I'm going to give is a reflection. It's not a question. You mentioned earlier that it's really important for you to treat everybody in your life with respect. And while under the influence of weed, your girlfriend says she feels disrespected. That's what would be called the double-sided reflection. And it's specific by looking at that particular value that the person has identified, because we're trying to understand them, and linking it to their current behavior. That's a strategy as well. Jennifer writes, I wonder if asking, is there a safer space to use without sounding permissive because he is underage? Yeah, and Jennifer, you're responding to what Anise wrote. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and again, that would be like your goal might be harm reduction. You want to help this person, if they're going to continue to use, to find a way to use that's not going to cause them to overdose or put them at risk. There's another strategy that can sometimes evoke change talk, which is called, drum roll please, coming alongside. And that strategy is simply when the person makes it very clear that they're not in a place where they want to make a change. And Jennifer, I'm thinking of you in regard to this because you mentioned stages of change, where somebody might be in pre-contemplation. I don't have a problem with alcohol. There's no problem here. Okay. There's absolutely you don't have a problem with alcohol. Where we accept the person where the person is at and not press them. Now, I will throw out a double-sided reflection that I might use there too, which might be the person says to me, you know, Paul, I don't have a problem with alcohol, so I don't know what we're doing here. Okay, well, it's really clear you don't have a problem with alcohol, and the court has mandated you to this particular program. What do you make of that? What's your thought about that? That's, again, a double-sided reflection followed by an invitation for elaboration. What do you make of that? I'm hearing you that you're telling me that you don't have a problem, and here you are. What are your thoughts about that? I'd really like to get your perspective on that. What do you want to focus on here? And guess what? And Jennifer, I wonder if you've heard this, or I wonder if other people have heard it. Sometimes the person will say, I just want to fulfill the court's requirements and get the hell out of here. And you know what? That's a behavioral change goal. So let's work together for you to fulfill the court's requirements. Let's keep talking. Let's do that. And sometimes what can happen is in that collaborative partnership, the person might start to put the dots together and realize, oh, well, you know, alcohol had something to do with X, Y, and Z. But if we don't meet them where they are, we'll never get the opportunity for those dots to come together. So just keeping that in mind. Demetra writes, how would you approach the conversation if they say that they have it under control? I would love it if somebody would say that. I would want to know more. I'd be curious about what under control means for them, what under control actually is. Because again, folks, we really want to understand it from their perspective. And I'll give a concrete example that just popped into my head. Let's say I'm thinking of Jennifer's client, maybe somebody who's mandated to care because of a driving while under the influence. And I'm just making that up, Jennifer. I don't know if you even provide those kind of services. But as an example, person says, no, it's not a problem. I've got this under control. Okay, tell me a little bit more about how you have this under control. Oh, well, since I got arrested for this, whenever I go out drinking, I don't drive my car back. I call an Uber to take me home. If a person told me that and that was part of their under control, even though they were still drinking, I would affirm that. I would reflect that back to them because, folks, that's change talk. They've done something that's reducing their harm. It may not be the quote unquote final goal, but I'd be curious if they said, I've got this under control. I'm going to share my screen again. And I do want to just share with you another strategy. And this I did share in the learning community conversation we had yesterday, but it's also another strategy to evoke change talk. It is the importance, confidence, and readiness rulers. And these are simply rulers where we would say something to the effect of, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not very important and 10 being extremely important, how important is it for you to stop consuming alcohol? Similarly, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not very confident and 10 being extremely confident, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you can stop alcohol consumption? So these are, again, types of open-ended questions, and they're types of open-ended questions that are used in a very specific way. I've included, sometimes it can be helpful to actually have a visual ruler that people can actually point to or circle a number for the conversation. I've also wanted to share with you these specific steps, which I went through in the learning community conversation that we had yesterday. These steps are how you effectively use the rulers. And I just want to spend a moment and focus on 4, 5, and 6 for just a moment. Let's say I say to the gentleman, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not very confident and 10 being extremely confident, how confident are you that you can cut down the amount of weed you're smoking on a daily basis? And the person says, 7. Okay, so you've rated yourself a 7. I'm now moving to 4. Why not a 6? The reason we go to the lower number, folks, when we use these rulers is because then that gives the person the opportunity to make the argument as to why they're a 7 and not a 6, thus evoking their strengths and their change talk. Then we would want to reflect what they said, why they're not a lower number. And I am going to also touch on 6. We might say to them, and the reason we want to reflect and summarize what they said is because that's employing their change talk. Then we might say to them, okay, so you rated yourself a 7. What might increase your confidence to a 7.5? And then we would want to summarize what they said there too. And then at the end of using these rulers, we would summarize the full conversation and emphasizing, summarizing the change talk, because it's intentional that they hear the change talk again. Just going to check the chat. Oh, yes. And Thurston likes using the scale. Yeah, Thurston, I think you're not alone in that. Because the scale, it can be very effective and it can be very concrete. And thanks for putting that in the chat. And I will underline, based on what Thurston said, a point that I want you to consider about these scales. And P.S., in order to do these and do these effectively, and Thurston, I don't know if you're going to agree with this or not, I found it took me about 600 practice opportunities for me to get fluent enough to really, and that's, I think, a conservative amount that I practice these in order to develop a certain kind of fluency where I'm actually able to have a conversation and it doesn't feel like I'm, using some clunky tool. And that was for me. I'm kind of a slow learner, and it took me a lot of practice in order to become fluent and to feel confident in practicing motivational interviewing. The thing I do want to underline, though, in regard to the rulers, and I said this yesterday, and that's why I'm inspired to say it today to anybody who maybe wasn't here yesterday around these rulers, is that a 9 is no better than a 2, and a 2 is no worse than a 9. The use of these tools are about evoking the change talk. It's not about getting the person to attend. The conversation is the intervention. Just keeping that in mind, because sometimes the scale 1 through 10, 1 bad, 10 good, that's not the emphasis. And the emphasis is not about getting somebody to a higher number. The emphasis is the conversation. And it's very relevant to our conversation. It's the verbalization of the change talk and then the employment of their change talk. I just want to check the chat again. Yes. Person opens, yes, the person opens the opportunity to the scale. Agreed. Agreed. All right. So, folks, as we look at this picture of our former President Barack Obama looking at himself in the mirror, the thing I really, again, want to underline is all of these strategies, these few that I went over, they're, in essence, the use of specific open-ended questions or reflections that relate to the identified behavioral change goal that the person is focusing on in the conversation. Employing change talk is as easy as remembering this acronym, EARS, which may seem eerily familiar to OARS, OARS, the core communication skills, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. EARS, and that's why there's a little rabbit here, EARS is related to the ability to employ the change talk. And we know that you don't have to wait for it. You can evoke it. If the person offers change talk, invite them to elaborate on it. Invite them to say more about it. If they offer change talk that has within it strengths that the person has, affirm their strengths. If we hear change talk or we evoke change talk, reflect that change talk back to them, meaning that it's a statement ending in a period. And if change talk naturally occurs, or if it's part of what we evoke in the conversation, put it in a summary. So Employing change talk is simply using these 4 elements related to that change talk. Invite the person to elaborate, affirm the strengths contained in it, reflect it, make a statement, repeat it, make a statement in a period, and then include it in a summary. Okay? We can also go, elaboration is really asking open-ended questions about that change talk. And think about it, folks, just as a way of concluding our conversation today. Let's say Angelica offers change talk about her specific behavioral change goal. She says it once. I reflect it. She hears it again. I ask an open-ended question. She elaborates on it again. So she says more about it. And then I summarize it. I include it in a summary. She's been exposed to her change talk 4 times. That's how motivational interviewing works. It's through the employment. It either naturally occurs, we employ it. We evoke it using the strategies, we employ it. By employing it, you're fattening the change talk dog. That's the dog we want to feed. We don't want to fatten the sustain talk dog. We want the ring side to get stronger and bigger. We want the sustain talk side. We know it's there. We attend to it. We don't want to make it grow. And I just see that Thurston put something in the chat. Affirmation of the person's change talk creates partnership and acceptance. Yes, I use it often. Agreed, Thurston, 100%. Thank you for putting that in the chat. Folks, thank you so much. I hope that some of you will consider coming to the 6-hour training at the end of May. That'll be 6 hours focused on motivational interviewing, opportunity to practice. I'm going to share the last slide with you. Please take good care. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. My colleague Clyde Frederick just put the, oh, wonderful, wonderful. That's great, Thurston. Thank you. My colleague Clyde Frederick just put the live link in the chat. You can click on that. I'm also going to show you the last slide. It has a QR code. You can take a picture of it with your phone or you can scan it, and that will take you right to the evaluation too. After we get your evaluation, we will send you your certificate for 2 credit hours, and we will send you a copy of these slides for your use personally with anybody else you want to share them with that supports what you're doing. Take good care and have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Thank you so much.